What's up, everybody? I'm Dan Kornhauser,
And I am Bobby Hunt.
and thank you guys for tuning in as we go down into the world of sports once again, this time with our 2020 NFL Draft review. We're going to touch on a little bit of everything across the league, everything that happened over the weekend, our favorite teams, what they did, the local flavor of Jets, Bills, Giants, what went on those fronts, how do we feel about those draft classes. And of course, we're going to give you our 3 likes and 3 dislikes of teams that we think aced the draft process and 3 teams that failed. So there was a lot of shit going on, Bob. Not only draft picks, but trades and movement up and down the board. Some huge, crazy surprises. Some not so much, like the top 3, for example. No surprises at all in those top 3. The Dolphins lied to everybody from the very get. It was Tua all along, and they fooled all of us.
Not me. Not me.
Not you, but they fooled everybody else. And they ended up taking Tua 5th overall. Herbert goes 6th to the Chargers. Pretty ho-hum what everyone thought it was going to be months ago, and ended up coming to fruition.
Yes, it did, and it was certainly just as well done and well served because it had to be done. And I'll touch on that a little later, more specifically with the Dolphins. But if anyone's keeping score at home, as far as the mock we did between the 3 of us, wasn't pretty. Always a little difficult doing those. We only had 4 correct. We had the top 3, and then Dan did nail the C.J. Henderson pick, so kudos to him for that. At number 9 to the Jaguars. As far as individual mocks, I think I did win it because I had Burrow, Young, Okudah, like pretty much everyone did at the top 3 just about. But then I did have Tagovailoa and Herbert at 5 and 6. Ultimately, I didn't buy the hype there or the rumors, the smoke screens, and thought, you know what, the Dolphins are going to cut the shit. They really do love Tua, and they'll take him there. So they did that, and then I got Mekhi Becton at number 11 to the Jets. So it was a total of 6 correct. I didn't get any half points for right pick in the right spot or a player to a certain team, unfortunately, which usually does seem to happen. But wasn't to be. I screwed up with Derek Brown and Isaiah Simmons. I could have had 8. I could have had a quarter of the first round if I had just listened to what I had been saying, but didn't, because I had said previously Derek Brown was the mock draft lock at 7 to the Panthers. You know, of course, past the top 3 or 4, because that's a lot of times we know what that's going to be. But I digress. I got 6 right, so I'm pleased.
Yeah, I mean, that's not bad. It was a kind of a weird year, and my mock pissed me off because I had probably 10 picks that were off by 1 selection. So, like, I had Herbert 5, Tua 6. I also had Isaiah Simmons, I think, 7, and Brown 8. There's the offense of the wide receivers. You know, I did not have, even though he was my 12th player on my board, I didn't have Henry Ruggs 12th to the Raiders, and I didn't have him the first receiver off the board. You know, stuff like that. It's disappointing for my mock draft.
Almost only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades. And so there were close ones on my end too, and I'm sure even on Greg's, although his mock was pretty terrible, honestly, his own. And he pretty much gave up after I think Herbert got picked 6 and just shot his whole mock. But regardless, it was still a fun exercise, and I hope everybody enjoyed it.
Absolutely. But let's talk about some things, okay? Now, I would like to keep our respective favorite teams for the end. So Giants and Lions toward the end. We'll probably finish with the Giants because that is a local spot. But I do have some things to say
I'm sure you do.
On these guys. We're going to get into that later. Ooh, I'm getting so angry. So I'm getting so mad just thinking about it. So before we go crazy on that front, let's woosah it up for a quick second. And let's talk about other teams. All right, let's talk about some positive things. So if you're looking at the draft overall, Bob, shying away from teams for a second, what were a couple of picks that you particularly liked, whether it be a player to a particular team in the first, second, third rounds, whatever, or whether it's a player who slid a bit further maybe than you came to expect with your big board where you had him ranked? Ended up being good value. something
Right.
like that. Just a particular player to a team for whatever particular reason. Something that stood out to you that you really liked.
Okay, well there were a few. So for one, even though we both hate the Packers draft, and we'll certainly cover that a little later, I do like for a player, Jordan Love. At least you get to sit potentially behind Rodgers and not be thrown into action right away, be expected to be a savior, because that wasn't going to happen. So
Right.
I think for him, it's a great situation because no one's going to see how sloppy his footwork is right out the gate, or how he really needs a lot of time to develop. He's going to get a chance to sit behind Rodgers, cool his heels, and not be thrown into game action and potentially fail right away. Say if he was expected to be the Dolphins or Chargers franchise quarterback, that would have been a bad look for him. So I think it was great for him. I don't think it was great value, however. Now, some of the great value picks that I look at, CeeDee Lamb, for instance, going to the Cowboys at 17. I had him at 6 on my board, so I think that was a great get by the Cowboys, for instance. Let's see, what else do I have here? I think Curtis Weaver, that's one of the really late picks that I actually had as pretty high as an edge rusher that wound up going to the Dolphins in like the 5th round. So I think
Mm-hmm.
that was great value. Christian Fulton to the Titans. He was in not my
Yeah.
first round grades, but he was just outside of it. He was at
Mm-hmm.
27 on my big board. So
That
them
was a really
getting
good,
him,
that was a really good one. Yeah.
right, them getting him toward the end of the 2nd round was a great look. Amik Robertson, he was in my top 100, and he wound up going 4th round to the Raiders. Those are some of the best examples that I can think of where I think there was a lot of value on the board, and those teams snapped it right up. And the Ravens were another team that I'll get to as a team later, but those are the really ones that stick out to me right away.
Yeah, for me, one of my favorite moves actually. I wanted to talk about the Ravens, but I'm going to go with the Carolina Panthers. They picked up Jeremy Chin at number 64 overall in the 2nd round. I had him at number 36 on my big board, so they got him a full damn near round later almost in terms of pick value. So he's going to plug in right away as a starting safety on this team. He could have been a 1st round pick, depending on how the board fell and stuff like that. But we know how safeties are devalued in the league these days, especially in the draft. We didn't see any in the 1st round, so kind of shows you how teams around the league feel. But I really like that Chin pick. They had nothing in the secondary. They needed a safety. They had a lot of losses this offseason on the defensive side of the ball, and they rebuilt their defense. And Chin's going to be a huge part of that rebuilt secondary moving forward.
He definitely will be, and they made a defensive player pick with every pick in their draft. All 7 picks wound up being on the defensive side of the ball, which I believe they said is the first time that's ever happened for that many players. There's been other times where less than that, and teams took all one side of the ball, but this is the first time that 7 or more all came from one side of the ball, which is really impressive. But I think they definitely needed. I like the Panthers draft too, because they sorely needed help at all 3 levels after the losses they've sustained in the offseason.
Oh, they absolutely did, dude. It was not a normal offseason by any stretch of the imagination. Um, there was a few teams that lost a lot of key players. The Vikings being one of those teams that lost a lot of key contributors in the offseason. At all the levels, particularly on defense. They lost their top 3 corners. They lost Griffin. They have a lot of holes to fill on the defensive side of the ball. So there's a few teams that had a lot of losses this offseason, the Panthers being one of them. But I like how they were able to fill some of those holes, particularly in the draft, particularly with those later picks. It's easy to hit a home run with a guy like Brown in the 1st. But what they did with their other picks was pretty impressive. They played the board pretty well. Now, to the flip side of that, Bob, is there a guy that you maybe looked at was like, why? Why?
A
What happened?
player? You're
Yeah, a
saying
particular player that got picked by a team maybe in an earlier slot or maybe in a weird fit. Maybe they have already a couple of starters and this guy's was a high pick and strictly a backup to start his career kind of a thing. What stood out to you as like when you saw it, you were just like, why? What? Just
yeah.
mm.
This one wasn't the worst one, but of the 1st round that comes to mind is AJ Terrell to the Falcons at 16. Just a little high for my blood. I think Terrell's a good player, and I like him for what they want to do. So I think it will turn out to be a decent pick. In the end, it doesn't really matter where you pick a guy. If the guy performs, it can't be high enough or too low. It's obviously it gets talked about more if they greatly outperform their draft position, like a Tom Brady, of course. But I think, the flip side, no one's going to be saying if Terrell's a starter for 10 years, oh, wow, that wasn't worth pick number 16. No, it absolutely was. So that was one
Exactly.
player that, to me, wasn't one of my top three corners, I believe, but he wound up being the third corner off the board after Okudah and C.J. Henderson. So I think that was a little high and rich for my blood. Let
Okay.
me see. There was one other that really stuck out to me that I'm just trying to find now in all my notes here.
Well, while you search, I'll fill in that gap by saying my player who when they selected him, I was like, what the fuck, was Jalen Hurts. That stood out to me. It stood out to everybody as soon as it happened. I mean, it's one thing to take Jalen Reagor. Like, I do like what the Eagles did overall with the guys that they selected. I really think their later picks were solid. For example, they got Prince Tega Wanagahu from Auburn, the offensive tackle. I had him as my 74th overall prospect. They got him at 210. Crazy, crazy value. Really good shit. And all the players that they drafted were on my final big board. And I think they got some real solid contributors in the later rounds, in particular mid rounds. But Jalen Hurts, why?
It was a
Just
stunner. One of the stunners of the draft. I mean, it was a second-round pick, so it's not as stunning as when a first-rounder gets taken, like Jordan Love to the Packers. But it was. I don't agree with Philly's thinking there.
I mean, they're at 53rd overall, and there was still a lot of good prospects on the board that they could have taken, and they had other needs. And you don't need a quarterback that high. I get it. Wentz hasn't been healthy the last couple of years, and it's a risk, and you need a quality backup quarterback. And Hurts did have the arrow pointing up throughout the process. The off-the-field stuff was good. The whiteboard stuff was good. The interviews were good. And he improved as a thrower very clearly, particularly at the combine, threw very well. And it was impressive enough to get him second round. But I don't know, man. The Eagles were sitting there with a lot of other solid pieces. Denzel Mims, Josh Uche, whatever, Christian Fulton, Jeremy Chin, just to name a few, even guys who went in the third round. Ashton Davis at safety. They had a lot of good options. Josh Jones at tackle, Zach Bourne. I mean, the list goes on and on. I could probably list 20 guys that they could have had over Jalen Hurts at that spot that would have filled a need and be a quality player and, in some instances, be a good value.
The corners especially, because I remember last year when I was doing draft prep and whatnot, and I saw a lot of Eagles fans were saying it's crazy that people were mocking us secondary players because we like our guys, and I thought that was foolish, but I did believe it then, and they didn't. And their secondary, again, was atrocious this past season. And then going into this draft, I thought, all right, they need a corner, but they do need a receiver. So even though Reagor was a little high for my blood, I can understand it. It was a need, and it wasn't too bad as far as value for me. It was still a little higher than where I projected him, but still, I understand it. But yes, in that second round, considering how bad their secondary still is, to not get, say, Christian Fulton, who was on the board, or Jalen Johnson, who winds up going to the Bears, that's bad. You could have really used help there. And then you look at the rest of their draft, and they didn't take any corners. They took Kayvon Wallace, safety out of Clemson, in the fourth round.
Who at best projects as a slot guy because he spent a lot of time in the slot for Clemson. But they needed outside guys, and they lost Malcolm Jenkins. They did not think this through, I feel.
Now, they did get Darius Slay a few weeks before the draft, so we do have to factor that in. They did get him from the Detroit Lions. He will definitely start on the outside and help that secondary. But considering who was on the board, yeah, quarterback was not a big need. And I know the Wentz injury concerns, but it's not like his contract is coming to an end. He just signed that extension about a year ago. I think it was last offseason. So they're still committed to him long term. And while I love Jalen Hurts, I'm a big fan, and I do think this is a good fit for him as a player, I don't like it for the Eagles as a team.
Yeah, no. I mean, it's questionable to say the very least, but we'll see how it plays out inevitably. And he might even see time this year if Wentz gets hurt again. But I digress.
He was healthy last year, so kudos to Wentz. He did play all 16 games.
Right, but there's always something with him. You always wonder if he's actually 100%.
Oh, definitely.
Because again, what he dealt with a couple of years prior, it's a gamble. He misses time no matter what. Damn near, it feels like. Even during the season, it feels like he missed a few snaps or a few drives here and there for different reasons. But let's move on. We do have a lot of other things to talk about. So overall, Bob, how did you feel the draft went? Did you think it was a roaring success? Did you have any problems with it? Did you find it fun? Did you find it weird? Like, was it, did it, what was going on? How'd you feel? No fans, in people's homes, like.
Right. So what I did like is I did like the virtual draft. I think they did pull it off well. It was nice going into everyone's different homes and seeing the reactions. Obviously, some were very funny, or like CeeDee Lamb, where he snatches the phone out of his girlfriend's hand. She tries to slickly grab his second cell phone. He just snatches it away. That was awesome. I love that moment. Just seeing stuff like that, or people started making fun of Roger Goodell because it looked like he was probably a few drinks in and he was relaxing on the couch, the recliner, toward the end of, I think, the second day on Friday, looking like he was reading the Christmas special or something like that. So things like that, going into families' homes and seeing how they react, and just spending more time with just a family rather than just seeing them go up to the podium, I thought was great. On the flip side, though, I hated the fact that pretty much, not all, but a lot of the prospects, they had to highlight some tragedy that happened in their lives, whether it was someone dying or someone having some kind of illness. And I get that those stories are sometimes involved in the draft and talked about. And certainly, like Jeff Okudah, made a lot of sense. He's a top 3 pick, winds up going 3. And they talked about how his mother, was battling cancer and then ultimately died shortly after he got onto campus at Ohio State. Yeah, story like that makes a ton of sense. He's a top 5 pick. But even as the rounds got later, second, third, fourth round, you still saw the graphics showing, this for T. Higgins, top of the second round, his mother battled addiction for 16 years. Why do you have to bring that up? Why do you have to mention it? I don't see the point in some of what they were doing as far as what they were saying.
Yeah, that was a weird thing for me too. I feel like you and I were talking about that a lot. We had we weren't hanging out for the draft, but we had a Zoom party going on with a bunch of people, and we kept talking about that. It was like, oh yeah, this player got picked, and his grandmother died in 2006 when he was 11, and it was like, yeah, he never met her, but she was a key figure in his mom's life, and it's like, okay, what are we talking about? I get it. Like you said, sometimes there's a story to it, like with Okuda or whoever, where a prospect's mother has cancer and dies, or their grandmother had this ailment and passed away, and they have their name tattooed on them, and whatever the hell. There's stories for everybody. Everyone's got a tale. Everyone has tragedy in their lives and stuff that they overcome. But I feel like it was a bit overboard. I feel like
it was overboard. Now, I can't speak to what the production did if they reached out to these guys and wanted to talk about. Obviously, Okudah was a main piece, but I would feel like for someone like Higgins, like, did they talk to him and say, hey, do you want to talk about your mom's addiction? I don't know. I didn't see necessarily them interview T. Higgins or anything, but that's just one of the examples. And there was plenty of others throughout the draft, and there's plenty of memes being about it saying, oh, here's a story about everyone that they love that is now dead. And it's true, because you felt like constantly on the graphics or them just talking about it on the draft coverage, they were bringing it up with a lot of different players, and I just felt it was unnecessary. So that was one of the lowlights, but there were highlights as well to the broadcast.
Well, yeah, totally. And then the flip side of that, someone dying and, this is their sad tale. One of the prospects, it escapes me at the moment, but his mom had cancer and she survived. And she actually was sitting next to him when he got the call. So like stuff like that, like that's fucking cool.
Right.
That's relevant. Like she's literally dealing with it right now. She's sitting right next to him with like the thing on her head covering, her chemotherapy, loss of hair and stuff like that.
Right.
And she's sitting there. So like that's really relevant. Like that's important. Like, it was an underclassman. They said he declared because his mom was fighting cancer and stuff like that. And
Right.
this will help the family and whatnot financially. So, that's relevant. But the rest of it, like you were saying, it was, I don't want to say tasteless, but it's like, unless it's directly relevant like that, like it's an actual story telling us how they got here, like Kinlaw. His life was shit when he grew up. He had a lot of stuff that he had to deal with as a kid growing up. That's relevant because he overcame all of it and became a top 15 pick. So like,
Well, to
There
your
was
point,
some good. There
they
was
could
some
still do
good.
that for the other prospects, though. I mean, they could have
No,
said that for
yeah,
T. Higgins, but I'm just saying, yeah, it
but
was overkill. It was
but it
too
was,
many of
yeah,
them.
it was too many of them, and it was they even did it for like the late round picks, where a guy got picked in like the sixth round, and it's like, oh yeah, his uncle had passed in a vicious car accident when he was just born, and it's like, who? And his little brother's name is his uncle's name, and that's always been important to that family, and it's
Yeah.
like, come on, really, like, but anyway. But overall, I think it was a really good success. I
Well,
know
it got a crazy
it got
ratings.
crazy ratings, yeah, highest of any draft ever, I guess.
Makes
And
sense.
well, yeah, because there's nothing else on TV. So,
Yeah.
and it's our first bit of sports that we've had in a month and a half at this point. So people were fiending. I get it.
Oh man, I was so happy today when I realized that I had started recording it the other day, so I could like go back and rewatch parts I missed, or just have something to watch because clearly we won't have any live sporting events anytime soon. So I'm very happy and pleased that I realized that. That's a little side note just for me, but I
Yes.
definitely want to dive into some of the other tape that they showed and parts I missed because there was a ton of coverage.
Yeah, and I guarantee you were doing other things just like everybody was throughout the whole
Exactly.
draft weekend. But let's move forward and let's talk about our likes and our dislikes. Okay. Three each. We're gonna ping pong it. Do you want to, you know what? We're gonna do likes and then we're gonna do the dislikes, just bong bong bong
Works
each
for me.
way. Do we want to put us on the clock? Do we want to do a clock thing for this segment? So we don't get
I would hope we don't need that, but you can if you want.
I'm gonna
Up
bring
to
it
you.
up.
You might need to.
I'm gonna
Especially
need
because
it.
last time on that mock draft special, you were pushing the clock quite often. I did it a couple
Um,
times, but you lived up to your Madden fame, taking forever to make a pick.
well, we do those. So
You do those.
so let's do it. Okay. Bob, give me your first like. No, no,
So,
correction. Your first love. Which
oh, okay.
draft class you love?
All right. Well, just before you start that timer, as far as my criteria going back to last year, there's a few things that go into my grading. I don't give letter grades per se, but we are doing this love, hate, like, dislike type thing. So as far as that, how I put those into categories is one, value according to my big board. So if I say it's a value pick in this instance, the guy went later than where I had him on my big board.
Mhm.
Addressing team needs, big factor. Now you don't always want to reach, but if you're able to do it at a value or right where you should be slotted on my big board, that gives you good kudos, good points in my book. And then I also factor in like picks traded. So for instance, I'm not going to hammer the Rams, for instance, because their first round pick went to the Jaguars for Jalen Ramsey. Now, granted, the Rams are trending downward and don't look like a great team going forward because of all the losses they've had. It's no fault of Jalen Ramsey. When they acquired Jalen Ramsey in, I believe, week 7 this past season, they got markedly better in pass coverage. So
Mhm.
I'm not going to kill the Rams, even though I didn't love their draft. I didn't hate it enough because they did get a player of his caliber, for instance. And then also just efficiency and maneuvering the draft board. So were you able to maybe go down, trade down, and get the same player you would have wanted anyway, and then acquire a pick as well? So that's part of it. Or on the flip side, did you trade up and use a later round pick to jump up a few spots and really not get a player that is worth it there or might not be as impactful as you think he is? So those are some of the criteria for my loves and hates. And now for my first love, as much as it
There we
pains me to
go.
say, it's the Dallas Cowboys. They aced this draft. Certainly a lot of people feel that they did as well. Got a great pick at 17 with CeeDee Lamb. It didn't seem like the receivers, the top three between him, Ruggs, and Judy, were going to be available at 17. But lo
No.
and behold, the best one to me, CeeDee Lamb from Oklahoma, is there at 17. And he'll pair phenomenally with Amari Cooper and Michael Gallup in that receiving core. Huge upgrade over someone like Randall Cobb at this point in his career as he goes to Houston on an offseason deal. And the Cowboys got a home run pick there. He was 6 on my board. Next, you go to their second round pick, Trayvon Diggs, cornerback out of Alabama, one of my top 5 corners. I had him 31 on my board. He goes 51. Huge value. Then you look at third round, Neville Gallimore out of Oklahoma, defensive tackle. Had him 60 on my board, so that's late second. They got him in the third round. another great value pick. Now, I don't know a lot about Reggie Robinson, the second out of Tulsa, so I'm not going to pretend that I do, but he is someone that will help their secondary and be able to contribute at least on special teams right away and can be in that mix. They did lose Byron Jones, so is he going to be a starter right away? No, but they definitely could use the depth in the secondary. And then
Well, I had Reggie on my as number 114 on my board. Just
right,
to give
so
you an
I only did
idea.
I only did a top 100, so that's why he didn't fall inside my board. But for Dan's example, that's perfect. He's right outside of where he could have been on my board. But sometimes we do have big differences, but
Another good
not a
value.
ton. Right, so that's another good value. Then you look at Tyler Biadasz, who I was hoping the Giants would pick, and I'm fine with that they didn't. We'll certainly cover the Giants later.
Mm-hmm.
But to get him at the end of the fourth round is just crazy because I had a number 49 on my board. So he was a mid-second rounder for me, and he goes at the end of the fourth round. And then Bradley Anae, another great value pick because he goes 179 in the fifth, and I had him at 61 on my board. Now I was a little higher than Dan on him, but I still think Dan had him inside his top 100.
Top 100, I did not, but no, yeah, I'm sorry, 95, right inside my
Yep.
100.
All right. So
95.
there you go. So the Cowboys just hit a home run. They did a great job of getting value picks at almost every spot. They filled big needs at wide receiver and corner with Trayvon Diggs and CeeDee Lamb. Neville Gallimore definitely will help out in the middle of that defense. So they just did a great job of staying where they were mostly, didn't even need to trade, and just taking arguably the best player available on the board. So they're my first love of the 2020 NFL draft.
That's fantastic, dude. It's hard to argue with anything about the Cowboys. They absolutely aced this draft. I was a little disgusted when you picked them when we were doing our selection, but everything you said, point blank, couldn't agree with you anymore. I had Lamb at 8, they got him at 17. Diggs at 28 on my board at 51. Gallimore 51, got him at 82. Biadasz at 63rd, 146. Anae 95th, 179. So it's every single selection filled a need, key players. And for me, with my big board, when I look at my winners and losers, I look at my big board rank, so what the value was compared to on the big board to compare to where they were actually selected. Then if it fills a need or not, is it a need, immediate need? Is it like a guy who's going to replace a free agent next year, like the Jets, for example, taking Davis, I believe, in the second round. Is he going to figure in as a starter? No. But both their safeties are going to be free agents after this season, and they're probably not going to bring them at least one of the two back. So this kid can plug into as a starter next year. So I consider that as well. And then I also consider their impact and their role as a rookie, the more immediate role. Are they going to be a starter? Are they going to be a top backup? Depending on the position, are they going to be a rotational guy at running back or a nickel back or whatever the hell it may be? Are they a third safety? Stuff like that. So what roles do they fit? And all those guys that the Cowboys selected should easily be, most of them, starters as rookies. Would not surprise me, not one bit.
Definitely.
But I'm going to go with the Minnesota Vikings for my first love. They had a shit ton of picks. They maneuvered the board very well, and they were able to fill gaping holes with quality prospects up and down the board. And their third day picks, there was a lot of them. Let me just see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 third day picks or whatever it was. Just absurd number of picks. That's a whole draft class. That's multiple draft classes if you're the New Orleans Saints. But
yeah, that's what it feels like every year. The Saints have like 4 or 5 picks every draft.
Yo, if you want guys, you know who you want, you go get them. Good for them. It
And
works.
they're still in the playoffs every year lately. So
it's working. It doesn't affect their depth, seemingly. But anyway, back to the Vikings. Now, I'm a Lions fan, clearly. It's well established on the show. So generally, I'd say, fuck the Vikings. They can suck it. I hate them and their purple faces. God damn it. They had
purple faces. He got me with that one.
They had a wonderful draft. Stupid fucking Goldilocks bitches. They had a great draft. The fact that Justin Jefferson drops down to the 22nd overall pick, absurd. I had him as a top 20 guy on my board, so I thought highly of him. He was my wide receiver 4 as well. Jeff Gladney should automatically be a plug-in starter on the outside for them, despite the fact that he's 5'10". I think Well, the fact that they lost their top three corners helps his case to start. But I think he'll plug right in and be a great starter. Ezra Cleveland, who they got at 58th overall, I had him at number 59 on my big board. Offensive tackle out of Boise State. He needs to add some strength, and he does have some holes to his game, but they needed a tackle. I believe O'Neill's going to be starting at left tackle for them now. So they'll still need a right tackle. So he'll be immediately thrust into the competition at that position. And if not there, he could play guard for a year or something like that. They certainly could use the help all over. They badly needed a guard. And even though they took one later on in Blake Brandel out of Oregon State and one in the 7th round, those are more depth pieces if they even make the team. I think Ezra Cleveland is a big piece there. Cam Dantzler, corner from Mississippi State, 89th overall, 52nd on my board. Yet another value pick. Home runs on each of their first 4 picks. Each one of those guys should be starters really soon in their careers. And then they hit it. I mean, it's hard not to hit when you have 12 picks in the third day. But they made a lot of quality picks. DJ Wanham, I had him at 154 on my big board, but they needed an edge rusher, and I don't mind where they took him in the 4th round. James Lynch, the next pick, ended up being a huge value. I had him at number 89 on the big board. At 130 is when they took him. And even though he's a little undersized for a defensive tackle at 290 just about, I think he'll play another key rotational role for those guys early on. Troy Dye at linebacker, Harrison Hand at safety from Temple in the 5th round, Josh Meadows, also safety from Michigan, Nate Stanley at quarterback from Iowa. I know Bob liked Nate Stanley during the draft process. We talked about that in detail when we did our QB rankings and at the combine and so on and so forth. So they did well. They did well. They needed to address a bunch of positions, and they did exactly that. And there's going to be some good competition in camp for these guys. And I'm a little disgusted, but I think this is an A+.
Hey, well, we both went with division rivals as our favorite, so we're not biased. We don't like it. We'll admit it, saying, yeah, we don't want them to do well in a sense. I mean, we want the players to do well. Nothing personal, of course. It's just the jerseys that they're about to wear, the Cowboys and the Vikings. But
Yep.
both teams did a great job for all the criteria that we've mentioned. And with the Vikings, the only other thing I'll add is just, yeah, you make 16 picks, and it's especially crucial that they do that because similar to the Saints, they both are strapped for cash. They don't have a lot of money. They have barely any cap space. That's why you saw them make very little offseason moves in terms of free agency. And the Vikings are getting old on defense, whether it's Everson Griffin or Harrison Smith, Anthony Barr. So even though, yeah, some of them are still in their prime, they definitely needed a lot of depth and to be able to add guys that are going to be on cheap contracts, basically, so that aren't going to cost a lot of money so that they can address other positions. Now, it didn't fall into my top 3 just because I actually had guys like Jefferson, Gladney, Ezra Cleveland a little lower on my board. But yeah, I love guys like Dantzler. He was definitely a value pick for me, as well as Troy Dye. So I think with all the picks, they did a great job.
Hold me closer, Cameron Dantzler.
And you also appreciate that I had him 69 on my big board, and he went 89. Anyway, next to my second love of the draft was the Baltimore Ravens, who seemingly always seem to crush the draft, whether Ozzie Newsome is the GM or not. I believe Eric DeCosta's who replaced him about 2 years ago. And he did a great job just letting the ball fall how it may, the board fall how it may, like the Cowboys did. Patrick Queen at 28, great value. I had him at 18. J.K. Dobbins, the running back out of Ohio State, one of my top 4 running backs, just like almost everyone else, including Dan. He goes 55. I had him 20 on my board. Now, I knew he wouldn't go in the first round, but to get him that late in the second round, great value pick. And some might head scratch because they know they have Lamar Jackson and Mark Ingram, but Mark Ingram's already about 30 or 31. Gus Edwards isn't much to write home about. Last year's 4th round pick, Justice Hill, I don't think is anything more than like a speed back or a scat back. So I think this is a great pick that could be a 3-down monster for them going forward. Justin Matabuki at 71, another value. I had him at 58 on my board. And then guys like Devin Duvernay out of Texas, the receiver, they add to the competition there. They need help still at receiver. You look at Malik Harrison, linebacker of Ohio State. They badly need linebackers, something we talked about in our preview last week. So they get Patrick Queen and they get Malik Harrison. And they get some nice depth pieces later on in the draft. Geno Stone, safety out of Iowa, was much higher on almost everyone's board and he winds up going in the 7th round. Ravens did a great job filling needs and also just letting guys fall to them and taking them at a great value position on the board. And they also filled huge needs like linebacker and even running back. To me, not a huge need. For you, say it's probably a second tier need, but I think it is something that, from our perspective, is a great look because they don't have, a young Mark Ingram. Gus Edwards, again, nothing special. So I think it's a great compliment to Lamar Jackson.
I loved it. I loved everything that the Ravens did. They're another team that all their draft picks fell into my top 200. In fact, all of their picks, except for Broderick Washington, slotted into my top 175, with James Proche being the lowest ranked guy at number 175. But every pick that they made was a value, according to my big board, damn near. Queen was a great pick where he was. Dobbins was a steal. I had him at 35th. Matabuki, I had him at 72nd on my big board, went 71st. Malik Harrison, 86 on my board, went 98th. So all across the board, each one of those guys, their top, 5, 6 selections should all play roles immediately, including Tyre Phillips, who could play outside or inside, and he's a mauler, and he's going to plug perfectly in for him. It's hard to argue with you there, Bob. And they got real quality talent.
Even Ben Bredesen, I had him as 96 on my overall top 100. He winds up going 143. So another tremendous value pick for the Ravens.
I had him as a 4th round value. That's where they got him. Can't argue with
and then
with that at all.
Whether it's him or Phillips, they could take over for Marshall Yanda. He retired.
Gaping hole. It's a gaping hole, and you don't want a rookie to fill it, but if one of them steps up, all the more better. All the more better. But let's stick in I'm going to stay in the division. I was going to go with them last, but since you threw out the Ravens second, I'm just going to stick with the division. I'm going to go with the Cincinnati Bengals. It's easy. Oh, well, they were picking first. Oh, they should have gotten the best player, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, well, sometimes teams fuck that up, okay? So even though they had the first pick, it wasn't just about the first pick. They had the first pick, but compared to some other teams, they didn't have as many glaring, numerous gaping holes as some of these other teams did, like the Vikings, like the Cardinals, like the Dolphins, all these teams that needed to fill a lot of holes. These guys had very clear needs, and they filled those needs very, very, very well. I will give this is another A-plus class. They only had 7 selections, 1 in each round, pretty much at the top of every round, damn near. But all their picks were in my top 174. With Marcus Bailey, their 7th round pick, number 174, and I got him at 215. So all their selections were either right on board with where I had them ranked or were value picks. All of them except for Logan Wilson. But I like Logan Wilson nonetheless. I just had him a bit lower on my board, but where they took him in the 3rd round, I don't mind. Joe Burrow, franchise quarterback. T. Higgins, wide receiver 1. Pretty much because Tyler Boyd is a slot guy and A.J. Green's got 1 foot out the door. And I don't trust John Ross at all.
You can't. Not after all these injuries every year.
At all. I had him as the 33rd overall prospect on my big board, and he goes number 33. What's fucked up is my big board was a lot closer to where these guys got selected than my actual mock draft. So I'm going to have to look into that.
Yeah, you might have to next year.
I'll have to look into that a little bit better and see what goes on next year. That happened up and down my board throughout the draft. It was crazy. Like I had Jed Wills at 11, he went 10. But anyway, back to the Bengals. So I love that they got T. Higgins. He'll slot in and grow with Joe Burrow. They'll grow together. Logan Wilson, Akeem Davis Gaither, and Marcus Bailey, the 7th round pick from Purdue. Sorry, Bob. All 3 of those guys were quality picks. All 3 of those guys were values where they got them. And I love Akeem Davis Gaither. I had him as my 71st overall prospect out of Appalachian State. They needed linebackers, and they got some real good guys. I love all their picks. I really do. I think this is a great step in the right direction. They signed a lot of quality pieces on the defensive side of the ball in free agency. They added their franchise quarterback, a top receiver, a bunch of young athletic linebackers. I can't see this as anything lower than an A-plus grade. I can't do it. It's great.
I didn't have them as high. They were definitely a team I like, though. I definitely think Joe Burrow is a great pick at number 1, the obvious pick. Then T. Higgins, you know how much I was in love with him. I had him 15th on my big board. He goes right at the top of the second round. Now, the
Mhm.
only thing that I felt was a little questionable with them was just choosing to go linebacker with the next two picks. Definitely a big need. So they did fulfill a big need. I still like it. But say with Logan Wilson, they maybe could have taken Josh Jones instead. Mainly address the O-line. Basically, to me, they chose to go with linebackers in the third and fourth round rather than, say, offensive line if they were
Mhm.
drafting for need. Of course, they probably would say we're drafting best players available, but they did go two linebackers in a row, which we know is just a sieve for them. Their linebackers are arguably the worst in the entire league last year. They're just horrendous. So,
Them and the Giants.
right, the Giants, another team that's just bad at linebacker. So getting Wilson and Davis Gaither, I definitely like, but they passed up guys like Josh Jones in the third taking Wilson, and then they passed up guards like, say, John Simpson or Solomon Kinley, who just went a few picks after Davis Gaither in the fourth. But I agree. I think the Bengals did still have a very good draft and address a lot of needs. And Joe Burrow should be a great quarterback, in my opinion.
And you know what? Hakeem Adeniji should already be penciled in as their starting right tackle because Bobby Hart is a complete piece of shit and has
Right,
no
and that
place as
saved
a
it.
starting
That's
tackle.
that saved it for me too, because Adeniji is better than where he was picked in the sixth round,
Hmm.
so he could be an instant starter. But outside of Jonah Williams, who was hurt all of last year's rookie season, and maybe Billy Price, second or third rounder from a few years ago, not much you can get excited about. And even those players have yet to prove it at the NFL level. So Bengals still need help there.
Agreed.
I'm going to stick with the AFC, but go to a different division, and that's going to be the Miami Dolphins. Now, I'll admit off the jump that they actually didn't get a ton of value on some of their picks, like in the second, third rounds,
Hmm.
according to my board. But the biggest thing and why I wound up picking them is because, to me, they cut the shit. They stopped fooling around, pretending that they weren't interested in Tua, or maybe they were going to trade up and take a tackle. They did a tremendous job to other people smoke screening. I didn't buy it. I believe the love fest that they started with Tua over a year ago, and it did come to fruition. Now, I was wrong on some other rumors. I thought some other teams would trade up, and they wound up not doing it. But in the case of Dolphins, they did what I expected them to. Tua was fifth on my board. He goes number 5. So ultimately, this grade is mainly focused on him. I think he has the ability to be the best quarterback in this draft. Biggest flag is obviously a big one, and that's the injury history with the
Hmm.
hips, with the ankles, with the wrist. But if he can stay healthy, this is a home run pick, and I definitely think he's a franchise quarterback. Is very accurate, very mobile. He just needs to take better care of himself on the football field. Then you look at the other picks. Now, I didn't have great values. Austin Jackson, 18. I had him at 40. Bit of a reach. But with that said, I only had one other tackle ahead of him at that point where they were drafted. The top 4 tackles were already gone. So I think at least they addressed a big need on the offensive line. Then you look at Noah Igbinoghene, the corner out of Auburn, a little higher than where I would have liked. I had him at 51. He goes 30, but still a corner that arguably could start day one. And he doesn't even need to because they already have Xavier Howard and Byron Jones. Robert Hunt, my namesake, he goes at pick number 39, the guard from Louisiana, another guy that could start right away. Not a value pick. I had him as a third rounder. But again, another player that fills a need and will help with that rebuild right away. Then you look at Raekwon Davis, did get value there. I had him 56 on my board. He goes 74. Solomon Kinley in the fourth round, I had him 89. He goes 111. And then the biggest one on the mall, probably the biggest discrepancy, I believe, between my big board of just 100 players and where he
Curtis.
went in the draft was Curtis
Yeah.
Weaver, the edge rusher from Boise State.
Had to be.
Highly productive at Boise State. Maybe isn't the most off the charts athletic type of edge rusher, but he got it done. He had over like 30 something sacks in college, and I believe he set the Mountain West record, definitely the Boise State record. And they wind up getting him in the fifth round, late in the fifth round. So I think that was a great pick. And basically, with their 11 or 12 picks or so, they adjust a lot of needs. And most importantly, took the franchise quarterback that I believe they needed to, and they did it. So kudos to the Dolphins. I love their draft.
I wasn't. I'm not in as love with this draft class as you are. They have a lot of good name players, and they filled a lot of holes, which, like you said, was key. And the fact that they got Weaver in the third day of the draft boggles my mind. Like you said, he may not have the athleticism or the quick twitch burst that you're looking for off the line, as a pass rusher, but he's strong as shit. And he showed the bend going around the edge on tape that he could grow into a pass rushing role. So I love that pick as well. But the rest of these picks, besides two, are all reaches. Austin Jackson is raw. He's athletic as fuck, but raw, 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 raw. They're gonna have to work on him, and he's gonna be a starter from week one. At least he should be. He's the best tackle on the team as a rookie, so he should slot in at one of their starting spots. But there's gonna be some growing pains on that front. Noah, I think, was more of a value. I'm sorry, more of a what's the word I'm looking for? A luxury, more of a luxury pick because they, like you said, they already had two elite corners. They might have the best 1-2 corner punch in the whole league.
On paper, they definitely do. Yes.
At least on paper. And Noah will plug in right away as a slot corner, which is what they needed, and that's his best role for the league. But I don't know. I don't know how I felt about that at 30th overall. I had him as my 53rd overall prospect. Robert Hunt, some profiled as maybe the best guard in the draft. I know clearly the Dolphins were clearly high on him, and he'll slot in as a starting guard from day one with the ability to kick out to right tackle if needed. Well, probably left tackle because Tua is left-handed, so he'll need probably Jackson on the right side as his blind side protector. But I don't know. It's talent. They got a lot of good young talent, but I don't know how it's going to fit right away. A lot of good players, a lot of names, Brandon Jones, Holman Kinley, hell, even Jason Strowbridge, but I'm not in love with it. There were definitely other teams I think did better, but maybe that's nitpicking. I don't know.
Hey,
But
it would be fun if we agreed on everything.
True. My final like is the Denver Broncos. Denver Broncos came into this draft with a clear mission in mind, and that was to upgrade the offensive side of the ball and give their young quarterback Drew Lock a fighting chance. And they succeeded. They had a damn fine draft. They're sitting at number 15 and ended up having Jerry Jeudy just fall right in their waiting wet laps, just laughing all the way to the digital podium, if you will. And if you liked the CD Lamb pick, then you should love the Jerry Jeudy pick. This is the guy throughout the whole season that was considered maybe a top 5 prospect in the class, absolutely top 10, especially later on in the year. They get him at 15, plug him in opposite Cortland Sutton, just A+. That's just a great way to start. But they didn't finish there. KJ Hamler in the second round, small guy, 5'9", 180, kind of like a T.Y. Hilton light type player. Great after the catch, great in open space, slots in as their number 3 receiver from day one. Awesome. Lloyd Cushenberry, who they took in the 3rd round, had him at 65 on my big board, got him at 83. Center at LSU, could play any of the interior positions. Could slot in as a starter from day one, considering they lost their starting center last year. I think he left and went to the Jets. So they had a hole to fill in their offensive line. They got Albert Okum Gundam style. They got him and reunite him with Drew Lock, and I know they're excited about that. And then even later in the draft, they got a couple of lower tier prospects, but guys that I really like. Justin Strnad, that out of Wake Forest linebacker. They got him in the 5th round. Netane Amuti, the guard from Fresno State, one of the strongest guys in the draft, a true mauler in every sense of the word. So they're looking to build around Drew Lock. They want to give him a shot. They want to give him an actual chance to succeed. And their defense should be good enough. I didn't even talk about Michael Ojemudia, the defensive back out of Iowa. But they added quality pieces across the board. My only issue with this whole draft class was McTelvin Agim, the defensive lineman from Arkansas, who I thought they could have had a lot later, but they took him 95th overall in the 3rd round. He'll be more of a rotational piece. They like those types of guys, so we'll see how it fits. But overall, one of my favorite draft classes.
I like the Broncos as well. They did do a great job adding weapons for Drew Lock. After Cortland Sutton, it's pretty hideous. Noah Fant we both like from last year, but he's really only a vertical threat, not going to offer you much blocking. Not that Okwebunam is out of Missouri either, but they can line up too tight, or they can go 3 wide, or line up one of those tight ends at receiver, because now they have Jerry Jeudy, who can work in the slot or not, KJ Hamler, plenty of weapons. And then Netane Muti I had in my top 100, and he winds up going 181. Tremendous value there. So I did like what the Broncos did too. It just didn't fall in my love for a couple picks like Ojemudia and Asian. But aside from that, they definitely had a solid draft.
Now, from teams that we loved to teams that we fucking hated. Bob, who's
I
your first?
absolutely hate it.
Who is your
Oh my
first
god.
just disgust?
Well, the first team that I want to crush is the Seattle Seahawks. I absolutely hated their draft. Pretty much loathe it. Now, I did not have Jordan Brooks in my top 100, but that's mainly an error on my part toward the end of my draft process. I
Mm-hmm.
forgot to slide him up to the late 70s is where he would have slotted in. But with that said, that still puts him as a mid third round prospect. And they decided to take him at 27 overall. And they just have a fascination for some reason on reaching in the first round. It goes back, and this is all under the Pete Carroll era. So on one hand, I can't kill them too much because, hey, they've been a successful organization. They've made the playoffs pretty much just damn near every year of the past decade.
Mm-hmm.
But still, they don't need to reach. And not all these guys have worked out. Bruce Irvin was one of the first examples, I believe, 2012, I want to say he was drafted. They drafted him in the first round when he was a third-round prospect. Now, he's had a decent career. He's going to have a second stint with them now, but didn't exactly live up to what they expected and was gone after 4 years, I
Mm-hmm.
believe. I don't think they picked up his option. Then a couple years ago, draft Rashad Penny. He's been injury-riddled since. Shown flashes, but not panned out. And then L.J. Collier last year didn't contribute much as a rookie. Still have to wait to see with him. And then Jordan Brooks, third-round talent. I don't get it. I don't know why they felt the need. And it's not a huge need. I did talk about it in our preview that they could take a guy because Wagner's 30 now. KJ Wright is, I think, only on like a 1-year deal, and he's at the end of his leash anyway. He's not what he used to be. So I do think Jordan Brooks can maybe slide in right away as, say, their offside, their weak side linebacker. But it doesn't fulfill a need, and especially with the problems they have on the offensive line. They could have used a receiver still, even after taking DK Metcalf last year. I just don't think it was either a good value or just a big need when this team, yes, they were a playoff team, but they have so many needs regardless. Then you also look at their second round pick, another reach. Darrell Taylor, did not have him in my top 100. Now, if I expanded it, he would have made my top, say, 150 or so, but I did not have him in my top 100, edge rusher from Tennessee. And I do actually like the Damian Lewis pick. Didn't necessarily wind up in my top 100, but I do think he's the mauling, big body type that the Seahawks like. And they cut DJ Fluker the day after they drafted him.
Yes.
So you figure, barring anything unforeseen, like an injury or him just flat out stinking, he'll probably slide right in at right guard from day one. But otherwise, Colby Parkinson in the fourth round, they don't really need tight ends. I mean, granted, all their guys continue to get hurt, but they signed Greg Olsen in the offseason. Granted, that's only going to be for 1 year, and he's toward the end of his career. But Luke Wilson, solid blocking tight end. And we saw Jacob Hollister do very well for them last year. And Will Dissly, who can't seem to stay healthy, but he's played extremely well with Russell Wilson when he's been healthy. So I just feel like they should have gone another route than Colby Parkinson, who's basically just a 6'7" red zone threat. Could be a big threat. I just don't think he's worth it there. And then DJ Dallas, the running back out of Miami, I get adding to the running back room, but DJ Dallas was not one of the best running back prospects left on the board there. I think they could have gone a lot of different routes. So I just don't like their draft at all. I think it mostly sucks. They reached. They didn't fulfill some of their biggest needs with their first few picks. And ultimately, they are the team that I hate the most. I just don't get what their fascination is with reaching, particularly in the first round.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you on every point you made. While Brooks is probably one of the better run stuffing linebackers in this draft class, he leaves a lot to be desired in space, despite all the athletic ability that he's shown. And like I mentioned in our pre-draft podcast, when we were discussing linebackers and edge rushers and such, that he had some medical red flags that you asked me if there was a linebacker who I thought could possibly drop. It would be, I mentioned it would be Brooks. But
It didn't
lo and
happen.
behold, it did not happen. And I'll agree with you in that he wasn't that high on my board. I mean, I did have him at number 50 overall on my big board, but to get him at 27, big reach. Taylor I had at 82 to get him at 48, yuck. Damian Lewis, I had him at 169, so to take him 100 picks higher,
Right.
just
Well, it's not a good
not
value. I think
fair.
he'll potentially outperform where he was on draft boards because he's probably going to get an opportunity right away.
Mhm.
So that's why I didn't kill that pick. But yeah, again, he was a reach. He wasn't in my top 100, and you had him much later. The only other thing I just want to add before you potentially move on is just
Mhm.
they draft Jordan Brooks 27. Patrick Queen goes right after him at 28. So they could have I would have loved it if they picked Queen. They would not have been on my hate list. You subtract Brooks and put Queen in there, but they draft the same guys. I don't hate it. But to get a linebacker not nearly as good as Queen or doesn't even have as high a ceiling as him, it left a lot to be desired. I hate that pick.
My favorite pick of their class was Alton Robinson from Syracuse, the edge rusher. They got at number 148 overall. I had him at 107 on my big board. That was the only pick of value that I had them taking the whole class. And I'll agree with you, Bob. It was pretty fugs indeed. Not a fan. But I'm going to change. I'm going to stay in the NFC, and I'm going to stick with a contender, but I'm going to go back to my division. I'm going to go with the Green Bay Packers.
Ooh.
I don't know. I don't know if they had some bad cheese and it fucked up their decision-making process. Maybe they had too much wine with their cheeses out there in Wisconsin, the land of cheese, as they say. But it was fucking gross. I gave some love to the Minnesota Vikings, despite them being a division rival. But then I look at the Bears were gross too. I hated the Bears draft class as well. But the Packers was just, ugh. If you're a fan of theirs, I don't know how you can be happy at all. They
Can't
took
be.
Jordan Love in the first round. They traded up. They were apparently desperate to trade up to draft Jordan Love. Desperate was the word that I've been reading the most. And that's a fucking travesty if I'm a fan of theirs.
Yep.
Then they go in the second round. Do they address any of their needs? Absolutely not. Why would they even bother doing that? Let's just take A.J. Dillon, a running back, when they already have Aaron Jones toting the rock, and he just has had a career year and a Pro Bowl year and is one of the better young running backs in the NFL. Okay, great. We'll just draft a plotter. Hope we have a thunder and lightning combo, I guess. But hashtag yuck. Hate it. And then the rest of the way was just reach after reach and just complete lack of value across the board. They didn't take a single wide receiver, which was considered by many by far their top need. I know Rodgers is disgusted, repulsed.
He's been diplomatic over the last few days, hasn't been crushing them at all, but he's not happy. Let's not be confused.
I don't know. I don't know why they hate him. I don't know what the problem is. They offered him no help. I mean, Josiah DeGuara, this tight end from Cincinnati, didn't even have him ranked. A lot of teams apparently didn't have a third round grade on him, but they thought he was a great pick there. Even though there was literally a gaggle of top prospects available at that selection. Like I'm looking at it, and I'm even looking at the board. I'm like even at that pick, there were other tight ends on the board that went later that you could have had. Troutman, Albert Gundam style, Harrison Bryant, just to name a few. Okay, they could have stuck at that position and gotten a lot of better, more talented guys because it's not even like DeGuara's got that prototype size. He's 6'2", 240. So I'm not talking about a big guy. We're not talking about a red zone threat. We're not talking about one of the better athletes at his position in the draft. It's just gross all around. I don't know what they were thinking, and they should be ashamed of themselves. I know they won 13 games last year, and they were a game away from the Super Bowl, but they did nothing to help Rodgers. They're just hoping for the best, and I hate it.
Now, sometimes I try to play devil's advocate with things and see, all right, well, let's take a step back. We should look at things objectively anyway, and everyone's crushing the Packers. So I'm like, all right, well, let me try to look at it. But even when I try to look at it from the other perspective or how they would argue it, their front office, I still don't agree with it at all because Rodgers is under contract till 2023. So that would be toward the end of Jordan Love's rookie contract. Now, granted, there's an out in there before that, so that could happen. But either way, you're still wasting more of Rodgers. It's not his prime. He's a little bit out of it now, but he's still highly productive, still having 5-to-1 TD to interception ratios. He's very efficient with the ball. And you just didn't address huge needs like receiver. to help him out, or even say if they did take an offensive lineman. We felt receiver was the biggest need regardless of offense or defense, but they decided to not do that. And yeah, I hate the DeGuara pick. He was hovering around like 10th on my tight end rankings. And then as far as Jordan Love goes, at least if they went and got a quarterback that I really liked, it would be one thing. But they didn't even get value on that. To me, he was my 53rd ranked player. Yeah, 53rd, fifth quarterback. He wanted to be in the fourth quarterback off the board. And I don't think it's worth it at 26. So I totally agree with you. I hate the Packers draft, and pretty much everyone else does. Everyone's giving them terrible grades. It's just a waste for Rodgers. And A.J. Dillon, too. He's a two-down back in a league that really is more about three-down running backs and having, guys who can do more, not just one-dimensional things. Now, I get playing to a certain player's strength, but I just do not like what they did at all. It's really bad. Now, that was one that I thought of picking, but let you take that one. I also had taken the Cowboys as a love before you could. So I think that was only fair.
Thanks, Bob.
So I already talked about the Seahawks. But now let's go to the Houston Texans. One of the disaster franchises of this offseason that it just can't seem to get out of their own way, particularly Bill O'Brien, the head coach and general manager. So the pick that they wound up getting in the second round for DeAndre Hopkins, star receiver who went to the Cardinals in that deal, winds up being defensive tackle Ross Blacklock. So they take him at 40 overall, which is a decent value for me. I had him at 42, so a little higher than where he was on my big board. Does address the need, so there is that. But, I don't think that's worth DeAndre Hopkins, not one bit, and David Johnson, no. So that trade aspect of my criteria is just where they get killed here because Ross Blacklock and David Johnson for DeAndre Hopkins just does not do it for me at all, not one bit. I think that's hideous. Then you also throw in Jonathan Greenard in the third round out of Florida, who I think did make my top 100. I think that was actually close to where I had him, so not a reach again. Yeah, I actually had him 86, so they got a little value there. But he was supposed to get traded to the Lions.
That's exactly what I was just about to say.
Yeah,
I think they had a deal with the
it.
Lions on there, and the Lions just backed out last minute, pulled the Kornhauser. I love it.
I love it. So the Lions pull out of a deal for Jonathan Greenard. So basically the Texans took a guy that they didn't really want exactly, as it turns out.
Oh, well.
And then Charlie Heck, the tackle out of North Carolina.
Suck, bro.
Yeah, exactly. They take him in the fourth round. John Reed. Just nothing to get excited about at all, especially when you traded your best player in the offseason. They didn't do much to replace him in this draft. Now, I know they traded for Brandon Cooks, so they didn't need a receiver, but I would have liked someone who can give more impact than, say, Ross Blacklock. He might be a good run stuffer in the league and have some good pass rush moves, but he's not going to be Warren Sapp. He's not going to be Gerald McCoy. He's a solid player for their 3-4, but again, not a huge difference maker. And then they take a guy that they didn't even have in their future plans. So the Texans just whiffed on this draft completely, and it all really goes back to this stupid DeAndre Hopkins trade where they did not get good value at all.
Stupid is an understatement. We killed that fucking trade. We destroyed that trade. But I guess they didn't want to address the receiver position because they got four guys in Fuller, Cooks, who they traded for, Kenny Stills, and they signed Randall Cobb. So I'm guessing they're just going to go with 3 or 4 spread, speedy little guys. Fuller and Cooks to take the top off, and Stills, they all have deep speed. So maybe, they're going to try to run a college-style offense, I guess. But I'm with you, dude. I just not a fan. I'm not a fan at all. Not as bad as the Packers draft, but a lot of fewer picks. And I like the Blacklock in terms of big board rank. I had him at number 25 on my big board, got him at 40. And even Greener, 91 on my board, got him at 90. So it's not terrible. Even Charlie Heck, I had him at 207, got him at a little bit higher at 126, but fills that swing tackle role that they've been looking to fill the last couple of years. But you're right, nothing to write home about. I am going to shift gears. I'm going to stay in the AFC, and my next team is going to be the Pittsburgh Steelers. There were a few teams I wanted to discuss, but the Steelers, unfortunately, were one that stood out as one of the more underwhelming ones. They came into this draft with very specific needs at key spots like edge rusher, linebacker, wide receiver, running back, and I don't know how I feel about the players that they selected to fill those roles. Chase Claypool, I have him at number 80 on my big board, took him at number 49. He'll be a key piece to their red zone offense. him, Juju, and James Washington are a very intriguing wide receiver trio, and each of them offers different things at the position, which is nice. But with Juju being the number one, Washington being the intermediate guy, and now Claypool to be that deep
Red zone
threat red zone guy, Calvin Johnson, four-man Calvin Johnson. But they didn't get much value after that at any really other positions till later in the draft, where Alex Highsmith, 102, I had him at 126. It's not terrible, but he's raw. We talked about him also when we were talking about the edge rushing class in the preview. Raw, young, came from a lower level team, and just I don't know. I don't know how I feel about that in the third round. I don't know how I feel about Anthony McFarland as their running back pick that they went with. They had him at 187. Kevin Dotson out of Louisiana Lafayette was getting some love during the draft process, particularly the last few weeks. He had a good postseason circuit, but I didn't have him ranked in my top 200. So right outside my top 200, they get him at 135. Yuck. Carlos Davis I had at 147. They got him at 232, which is nice, but he's a rotational guy at best. They needed to add some key guys and potential starters, and I don't think they got either. It's hard when you don't have a first-round pick. They did trade that for Minkah Fitzpatrick, so you got to factor that into this a bit. He was their first-round pick, but I don't know how Big Ben feels. They didn't take a quarterback, which I would have liked to see them do, because we see Mason Rudolph does not look quite right. So if Big Ben goes down, they're dealing with Duck or they're dealing with Mason Rudolph again, and I think that's a problem.
It is a problem. I had the Steelers in conversation as well, but basically the Minkah Fitzpatrick trade had a big hand in making me not choose them because he did make a big improvement on that defense. Huge. They vaulted up the pass defense ranks after that, and he also had a bunch of interceptions early. So that, and then I actually agree with Claypool. I think it was a little high for my blood, and a lot of people even think that he's better suited as a tight end in the league, but I think he can. I actually do think he can be a receiver. But then the only other thing with that is just I thought, well, the Steelers have a very, very good track record of producing receivers in the early to middle rounds. So I'm not going to doubt them. He'll probably be great for them. Ultimately, that puts them more in the middle of the pack for me.
Well, when we were talking about our wide receiver preview for the draft, I had mentioned that Claypool's combine was goddamn identical to Darren Waller, the tight end for the Raiders, who the Ravens had taken in the 6th round when he was out of college as a wide receiver, but it never panned out. And the rest, as they say, is history. And then with Claypool on the board, if you're going to go wide receiver, why not take Denzel Mims, who the Jets took later on that round? Why not take Van Jefferson, who I wasn't that high on to take there, but I like Jefferson in a similar range to Claypool. There was other guys that they could have taken that, I don't know, just leaves a bad taste in my mouth from a team that we're used to having good drafts and making good moves.
Right. So the Steelers fall into your dislikes, your hates. My final one is going to be the Tennessee Titans. So I stay in the AFC South. First I said the Texans. Now I'm going to say the Titans. It wasn't an awful draft. That's why I'm putting them third of my dislikes. Also, Dan took some of mine, and we did it both ways on the love and hates. We want to have some different ones to offer you and talk about different ones. But a huge reach at the end of the first round in Isaiah Wilson. Now, I do think he can play right away potentially, but at the same time, there's definitely doubts as to whether he can, or even if he can be a tackle. I've seen that people think that maybe he should be slid into guard potentially. And I don't know, that's not great value when you're taking a third round talent, arguably. I had him right at the fringe of that. I had him 62 on my big board. So right on that border of second, third round, he goes 29. So I think a huge reach there, at least as far as playing the board for the Titans. Now, I do love Christian Fulton. So that one I do love. I do like that pick. I'm not going to say anything bad about that. Got tremendous value there. Some people have had him as their second best corner. I had him as my third best corner. And they wind up getting him at 61 at the end of the second round when he was 27th on my board. And people were talking about if you just flip the picks, it looks a lot better. If they took Fulton at the end of the first round and Isaiah Wilson at the end of the second, it looks a lot better. And it would pretty much match up with where I had him on my big board as well.
Same.
Now here's where it gets a little uglier is just Darrington Evans in the third round. Just doesn't break a lot of tackles. Did have 4.41 speed at the combine, but doesn't necessarily really run that fast on tape. And it's not like he's some elite receiving back or something that'll be the lightning to Derrick Henry's thunder. So I think they could have done better there. And then Larrell Murchison, I didn't have in my top 100. He goes up 174, so it would have been much later anyway, even if I did go that far. But I just don't feel like they got enough pieces to add to, say, the secondary. They didn't get the best running back that they could have where they were picking. And offensive line is another area that they could have really stood to address, because not only did they lose Jack Conklin, their starting right tackle in free agency, but even though they re-signed Dennis Kelly, he's still more of a swing tackle. Right guard still isn't solidified between Nate Davis and whoever else they have there. And then Roger Saffold is still very good. They just signed him last offseason. But again, you're going to have to think about his replacement sooner than later. So I just don't feel like they got great value on certain picks, like their first and third rounder. And then they just didn't play the board exceptionally well or address some of the needs that I felt were more pressing for the Titans.
I don't hate it. I don't hate it by any stretch compared to some of these other teams, but I don't have any beef with what you said either. I mean, you're right. If they flip those picks, I had Fulton at 31, and they picked Wilson at 29. I had Wilson at number 58 on my big board, and they took Fulton at 61. So they would have done very well and probably would have gotten an A if they did it that way. But, I mean, if it is what it is. You can't hate it. They still got Fulton in the second round, who will start or should start for them right away. They do need to replace Logan Ryan. But you're right. Other than that, Evans as a backup, Murchison as a rotational guy, Cole McDonald might be nothing more than a camp arm, and we'll see.
Well, also, that's the other thing that didn't help the grade. Is just they didn't have a lot of other picks to make up for it. Pretty much they had 3 in the first 3 rounds, and then you're looking at what? Murchison went 4th or 5th, and then the others were all 7th-round picks. So they just didn't have a lot to recover from on those other reaches.
Now, for me, my final dislike or hate, I was very iffy on it overall, and I'll tell you why in a moment, but I'm going to go with the former Oakland Raiders, the Las Vegas Raiders.
Caught yourself.
I caught myself, which doesn't happen often, but they had a weird draft to me because I do really like a couple of their picks, and then I fucking hate where they picked some of these other guys. It wasn't necessarily the names that they picked so much as where they took them. And we know John Gruden and Mayock, they play by their own rules, and they value leadership and stuff like that. Guys who come from top programs. And they filled needs. And they diversified their offense. But Ruggs at 12, I had him as number 12 on my big board. They got him at 12 overall. So you would say, well, what's the problem? My problem is that CeeDee Lamb and Judy were still on the board. And yes, they were all that close. And yes, I might be just a little overly critical, I guess. But if Judy and CeeDee Lamb are on the board, I don't know if you're taking a Ruggs. I guess we'll see how this shit plays out. And Derek Carr was one of the more accurate deep ball throwers in the league, despite the fact that he didn't throw it deep that often. When he did, he was pretty solid. So this will help open things up underneath, open things up in the run game. It'll help Josh Jacobs for sure. But it wasn't just Ruggs that I just didn't like, and it was the fact that there were other guys available. It was Damon Arnett, who's another one, corner from Ohio State. I had him as number 49 on my big board. They took him 19th. Honestly, I feel like they could have probably traded back a bit or taken him in the second round or something like that and been fine. I don't know why they took him at number 19. I think that was a bit much. He's got the size you look for, and they definitely needed a corner, seeing as Trayvon Mullen is currently their other starter. And then after that, it's Detroit cast off Nevin Lawson and Nick Nelson, who was a former 4th rounder, maybe Isaiah Johnson, another 4th rounder from 2019, last year's draft. But they definitely needed to add somebody in the secondary, particularly at corner, and they did that. But I don't know. There was a lot of guys on the board, especially at the corner position, that they could have taken. even at that same spot, I would have been totally fine if they took Jeff Gladney, uh, Jalen Johnson, Trayvon Diggs. Take one of those guys, Christian Fulton. I would have been fine with any of those guys being taken, but yuck, yuck, gross. Arnett leaves just a bad taste in the mouth. Then they went for an offensive weapon in Lynn Bowden Jr., who at Kentucky played wide receiver, played running back, was a starting quarterback for the second half of this past year, I believe, when their starter and backup got hurt. So he did a little bit of everything for him, but 80th overall, I had him at 128 on my board. Brian Edwards, they took him one pick later, so 80 and 81 took back-to-back receivers. Brian Edwards, South Carolina wide receiver, great size at 6'3", 212, but he just injury problems, questions, the value. The value is key, man. I mean, all these teams have different value. They got their own boards based on their offensive systems and shit, but you couldn't wait. You couldn't take him later on. Yeah, you had to take him right there. Did you? Did you really?
They felt like they did.
I'm just not a fan. Maybe I'm nitpicking. I mean, Edwards is physical and he manhandled guys in college, so maybe I'm nitpicking a bit. But then Tanner Muse. I had him at 193, took him at 100. The only picks I like, John Simpson, guard from Clemson. I had him at 85, took him at 109. And then Amik Robertson, who could have gone 2 rounds higher. I had him at number 76. They took him 139 from Louisiana Tech. He's small, but damn is he fiery. He's a really good coverage guy, physical for his size, and I think he'll be a great slot corner for him. I love me some Amik Robertson. And he was a great pick in the 4th round, but the rest of the class, just the value just wasn't there for me. Some good names and some good pieces and guys who will play key roles, but they could have done a little better, I think. We'll see how it plays out.
The Raiders were in the conversation for me too. Again, Ruggs, nitpicking because I did have him 14th on my board. They only took him 2 spots higher. But yes, I too had Lamb and Judy ahead of him. But then as far as Damon Arnett, that was the one that was escaping me at the top of the show. So you asked me what players, for instance, did you not like or thought was terrible value. I wanted to save Jordan Brooks for a little later because I had the Seahawks. So I wanted the A.J. Terrell because I have him 37 on my board. He goes 16 for the Falcons. But then Arnett was the other one that I couldn't think of at the time. He goes 19. I had him 50th on my board. He was, my 7th corner or so, or 8th. So, yes, there was other corners on the board that were better. And like you talked about, if they really were so inclined that they loved Damon Arnett, I feel like they could have played the board and traded down a little, and we would have felt like, all right, they did a good job at least acquiring another pick, and they still get the guy that they really like. But that didn't happen.
It did not. So we got our likes, we got our dislikes. Now let's talk about our local teams and our two favorite teams. Let's talk about the Bills. Let's talk about the Jets. We'll talk about the Giants towards the end, and I'll sandwich the Lions. I'll sprinkle the Lions in there a little bit too. So let's go over to the Buffalo Bills and the Jets, division rivals, 2 teams that are in different places right now. The Bills are looking to contend for Super Bowl, and they got the talent to do so and the coaching staff to do this. So we'll see if they can put it together and Josh Allen takes that next step. Whereas the Jets are rebuilding, seemingly forever rebuilding. And they came in, and both these teams came into the draft with different goals and different sets of needs and stuff like that. Looking at the Bills, Bob, they took A.J. Epinesa, 54th overall. I had him 38 on my big board. A guy who didn't really have a set position in the league at 6'6", 275, but played inside for Iowa, played on the edge for Iowa, and he produced. Had double-digit sacks each of the last 2 years against some of the better offensive lines and offensive tackles in college, in the Big Ten. And he more than stood his ground. Zach Moss was a key piece at running back. They drafted out of Utah in the 3rd round at 86. Another value pick who I had at number 99. And then they added some solid guys later on. Jake Fromm in the 5th round, who should compete right away as a backup quarterback, which is his role in the league. Gabriel Davis, the wide receiver from UCF. So I like this class. I don't see any superstars. I don't see anything more than some rotational guys and backups. But do you think, Bob, these selections at Vanessa, Moss, Davis, Bass, the kicker from Georgia Southern, who they drafted in the 6th round. Do you think these guys, along with adding Stephon Diggs in the offseason to the roster they already had, another year in that system, do you think this puts them over the Patriots, or do you think it takes them now and beyond that? Does it make them are they a Super Bowl contender in your eyes now that we see how everything's gone? Where does this class fit for you for the Bills?
I don't think the draft did that. I think the fact that Tom Brady left and all those other guys left from the Patriots is a big factor. Obviously, the Bills had a good year last year. They make the wild card round. Really should have beaten the Texans. They're knocking on the doorstep, and hopefully they do overtake the Patriots dynasty. I do think this draft does help toward that end. I just don't know if it'll definitely happen. I think the biggest factor is just that the Patriots got a lot worse. But trading that first rounder for Diggs, little steep of a price considering what the Texans gave up, or Texans didn't get rather, in the DeAndre Hopkins trade. But those are separate teams, separate GMs. I still think it was a pretty good trade, all things considered, in the moment between the Vikings and the Bills. It definitely is a needed weapon that they had to get there. And, well, look at it. Had they stayed there at 20 or whatever it was, they're not – or 22, I think – they're not getting one of the top 4 or 5 receivers. It didn't wind up happening that way. Mm-hmm. So probably better that they got a sure thing in Diggs that Josh Allen can build a rapport with right away. But, yeah, Epinesa, great value pick for me. He was around 38th or so, 39 on my big board, and my fourth ranked edge rusher. So getting him at 54, great value. Zach Moss, I had at 75. He goes 86, should be a nice compliment to Devin Singletary. And then Gabriel Davis, I do like, so they add to that wide receiver mix. Jake Fromm is a guy who I see as a career backup, but I do see him at the very least being one of those 10-year backups in the league, a solid one if you need to go to for a few games. So I think the Bills definitely helped themselves out here. But the biggest addition was Diggs in the trade, not so much the draft. I think that's really what you got to look at as far as evaluating the Bills here. But I think Epinesa, definitely a huge pick because Jerry Hughes is 30 or so now. They need help on that D-line. They did sustain some losses. They added a few pieces, of course, but ultimately they still need help and need to think about the future in certain positions on that front 7. So I think they definitely helped themselves with this draft and particularly the Diggs trade.
Now let's go over to the New York Jets. Football Jets gangrene themselves.
Jets, Jets.
But. So they came into this draft with also very clear defined needs at offensive line, wide receiver, especially in the secondary, edge rusher, all over the fucking place. And honestly, I think they filled those holes pretty admirably. Mekhi Becton at number 11 overall. I don't have any issue with that. Maybe Wirfs might have been a better immediate pick, but the upside for Becton, as we had discussed, the athleticism's off the charts. The size is elite. The length is elite. And he'll plug in right away at left tackle, as he should, and they'll figure it out. He'll be all right. Denzel Mims in the second round at number 59 overall was an absolute steal, in my opinion. Some had him slotted in the first round. I think I had him mocked in the first round as well. So he was very highly thought of both in the league and in mocks, but he slid, and it was to the Jets' betterment because they needed a receiver, and he should plug in right away as one of their top 2 or 3 options as a rookie. Ashton Davis, I mentioned earlier, the Jets taking him out of California, and he's a safety, track runner, athletic as shit. Had some injury questions and stuff like that, but a great pick considering both their safeties are free agents after this year, and they've been talking about potentially trading Adams anyway. So he's a nice future pick. Then they took a couple of Florida boys. Zuniga, the edge rusher from Florida in the 3rd round. LaMichael Pirine, who I'm not a fan of, but they took him in the 4th round. Depth guys. They're hoping that Zuniga can step up and be a quality rotational guy for him. Try-hard guy, not much of a measurables player. Athletically and stuff like that, but he was very useful for Florida. He was better the last couple of years than he was this year, but I like that move for him. James Morgan in the 4th round at quarterback from FI. You wonder, well, why a quarterback? Who gives a shit? If this kid can develop, they might have Kirk Cousins 2.0 or something like that, somebody useful, and Morgan had a lot of fans around the league coaches-wise. Bryce Hall in the 5th round was a steal out of Virginia at 158 overall, an absolute steal. I know Bob loved Bryce Hall during
I
the
do.
pre-draft process, and he definitely had Hall a lot higher on his big board for sure. And then even Cam Clark out of Charlotte. So overall, I think the Jets did a good job. They filled a lot of holes. Mims was a great get in the 2nd round, 6'3", 215 pounds, elite athleticism, great body control on jump balls. He's a real solid player. You need to see him develop as a route runner, but I really like what they did.
I do too. I think if I were to be giving letter grades, they would get a solid B plus, maybe even A minus from me. Did a good value on the board, or got good value rather on the board. So Becton went a little higher than where I had him on the big board, but not by much. I had him 16. He goes 11, and I did have him mocked to the Jets at 11 anyway, so he goes right there. And it fills a huge need that they have. Yes, they've invested in the offensive line in the offseason, but not any major free agent additions, mostly backups like the George Fants of the world. But they arguably got their franchise left tackle in Mekhi Becton, just a massive mountain of a man at 6'7", 360. And I do think he fits well with that Jets offense. Then you look at Denzel Mims. He didn't necessarily play at that speed at Baylor. He ran like a 4.38 at the combine, so that's why he was rising. He's nearly 6'3" or 6'4". So that's why people were surprised that he slid. But I think the fact that they didn't always see it show up on tape and that he wasn't maybe as productive as some other receivers, that's kind of what slid him down. But still, great value late in the 2nd round at 59. I still had him 35 on my big board. Then you look at Ashton Davis. This is basically who they picked using one of the Giants picks that they had in the Leonard Williams deal. So Ashton Davis, Jets fans are probably like, well, we need a corner more, maybe even another offensive lineman. But he is someone that can do that can fill a lot of roles, basically. He plays safety, yes, but he can also slide into the nickel corner role if they need him to, which they definitely need help with still. I mean, they still have pretty piss-poor corner play, even with bringing back Brian Poole, for instance, who was good last year, don't get me wrong, but they need help there. But Jabari Zuniga, edge rusher from Florida, health has been the biggest question, but he can be a top 2-round talent if he stays healthy. He definitely can be worth he can definitely outperform his 79th ranked spot, basically.
And I misspoke before. I confused my Florida ends. Greenard is more of the smart, non-athletic, non-twitchy guy. Zuniga
Right.
is the athlete who does need to work a bit more because he was good against lower tier tackles, but when it came time to face the elite offensive line, Zuniga kind of disappeared. So I want to see him do a little better on that front. But yeah, Zuniga is the athlete. Greenard is the try hard, non-athlete, intelligent guy. So I mixed up my
Exactly.
edge rushers. Sorry.
Exactly. So really the injuries and some inconsistent play against better tackles moved him down, but definitely could outperform where he was drafted. So they got a lot of value, adjust a bunch of needs, and even LaMichael Pirine. They do need a backup. I believe they didn't re-sign Bilal Powell. They don't have much behind Le'Veon Bell in the first place. So he was higher on my board than Dan's. Even with Dan being a Florida fan, he was 97th on my big board, just inside that top 100 that I did, and he goes 120, so another value. And then, yes, Bryce Hall is the other one that I really want to mention. I really loved him. He was in my top 100. I had him at, I think, 71. Yeah, 71 out of Virginia. And really another guy who injuries dogged him toward the end of his career, but could easily outperform where he was picked in the 5th round.
Yeah, dude, I had Hall at number 90 overall on my board. So a
Still a
solid
big
third
value,
round
yeah.
grade for him. Yeah, great value on him. But overall, a great draft for the Jets. Now, we will talk about the Giants, but I do want to save them for last. Area team, your team. So we'll save them for last. And let's talk about Detroit Lions. Now, there's not many Lions fans out there that are probably watching the show, but I am. And I got
You're
some
going to
things I
hear
want
about
to.
it.
I got some things I got to get off my fucking
Here we
chest.
go.
Okay, because last year was one of my more memorable rants when I went off about the TJ Hawkinson pick. I'm not going to rant like I did about the TJ Hawkinson pick. I'm not going to do it because I'm actually kind of pleased overall with the Lions draft. There were some players that I thought they could have taken other positions or that they could have gotten a little bit later, which does affect their grade for me. But it's hard to argue with the positions that they filled, and outside of the late players who are more likely than not just rotational guys, or if they even make the team, backups, Okuda should plug in right away as a week 1 starter opposite of Trufant. Love that pick. Swift, Kerryon Johnson has shown he is not reliable. I hate taking Swift where we took him at 35th overall because there was a lot of good talent on the board. I know that the Lions were in love with Yetur Gross-Matos during the pre-draft process, but they had a chance to take him and they didn't. I wonder if maybe they had DeAndre Swift as their top running back in the draft, and he was the top running back on my board. I did have him at 21st overall, so that was a great value according to my board. Then in the 3rd round, they took Julian Okwara, whose brother is already on the team, so that's kind of cool. I had him at number 42 overall only because of injury concerns. Otherwise, he would have been a first-round pick in my guess. 6'4", 250-pound edge rusher. Got him at 67. So another great value. Then it devolved a little bit, but I do like Jonah Jackson, guard from Ohio State. Moeller, he'll plug in right away. We have a whole gaping hole at guard since we lost Glass now in free agency. So Jonah Jackson should, at the very least, compete for a starting spot, but he should be starting, which should help the offensive line. We want to run the ball. Now we got a running back who hopefully can fucking stay healthy since Kerryon Johnson cannot. Even though he has shown that he's talented, he just can't stay healthy. So we added a couple guards, Logan Sternberg in the 4th round, competition on the interior of the offensive line, which is what we needed because we're set at center, we're set at both tackle spots. So cool. Overall, solid. And then to top it off, we took in the 6th round a guy whose last name is Penis. So, so I didn't have John Penisini, Penisini. I didn't have him ranked. They took him at 197 overall.
How could you not have him ranked? You should have had him at like 169 or something.
I should have had him at 169, and I dropped the ball. I don't know what I was thinking. I dropped the ball on Penis, but it's it's fine. So my only beef is that we had other guys at other positions that I would have liked to take in at those picks, but overall it's a solid draft class for the Lions. We filled holes. We got some guys who should start early on, and it's all right. I'm not going to rant.
Well, the only things I'll add with the Lions, I'll actually start toward the back of the draft. Quintez Cephas from Wisconsin. He's one of the guys that got smeared by the NFL draft basically, and was one of those didn't have it saying, like his mom died of cancer or someone's battling terminal illness or whatnot. But I took a screenshot of this because I just couldn't believe it. So they actually it shows like August of, I don't know what year, it might have been 2018. It says, charged with sexually assaulting 2 women, suspended by team and expelled from Wisconsin. But then the following August, found not guilty on all charges by jury, reinstated by school and team.
Yeah.
Then why put it out there that for having in the first place? Basically, it was found completely not true, or those are off the field red flags when the guy is cleared, literally found not guilty of all charges. It's not like they, it didn't go to trial or anything. It did, and he was found not guilty. So, unfortunately for him, that was brought up during the draft, but that's neither here nor there at this point. He's a Detroit Lion, and he did get drafted. But yeah, I think it must have killed you that they took killed you in a way, but at the same time, you like DeAndre Swift as a prospect and think he can help out, but is he maybe going to be Javid Best and have that kind of luck with the Lions? Hopefully not, of course. But he is one of those smaller running backs. And if Kerryon Johnson can just be healthy, I think that's a great 1-2 punch. But, yes, other needs that they could address there and played it was a great value pick still. But, yeah, Gross-Matos, if they loved him, I think they coached him at the Senior Bowl, or at least they're at the Senior Bowl with him. That could have really been a great pick for them. But I think they dropped the ball there. I think that's who it really should have been instead of DeAndre Swift. They could have got another running back a little later. But overall, I don't think the Lions had a bad draft. But, yeah, it doesn't really rank toward the top either. It's somewhere in the middle for me.
I agree. If anything, I'll give it a B or something like that. Very above average, very solid overall. But we'll see. We'll see how it pans out. Swift is a great player. Okuda's a great player. Talent's there. Okwara's a great player. The talent's there. Jackson doesn't need. So I can't really ask for much more.
All right, so now the New York Giants, my favorite football team. I think they had a very good draft. I do like their draft. I don't love it, but I do definitely like it. They addressed a bunch of needs, got some good value. So we'll start at the top. Andrew Thomas at 4th overall. I thought it would be Jedrick Wills. There had been some steam about him. I at no point really thought it was going to be Becton. I really thought it was going to be, and a lot of people that were talking about that, the rumors of who they would take, it was pretty much between Andrew Thomas, Tristan Wirfs, and Jedrick Wills. They wound up going with Andrew Thomas, who arguably might be the most ready of them. I think it's Jedrick Wills personally. I think he's got better technique, but still a good pick. I had Andrew Thomas 13th on my big board, so he goes 4th. A little bit of a reach, but not a huge one, and they address a major position of need. He could start at left tackle. More than likely, he'll be at right tackle while they still have Nate Solder on the team, but look for Andrew Thomas to be the left tackle in the future. I do like him, and I do think he fits the offense well.
Mm-hmm.
Then you look at Xavier McKinney. Absolutely love that pick. Definitely the favorite of all the picks that they made because it also had great value and filled need. Now, some people may think the Giants don't necessarily really need safeties. They're not the greatest in the world, but they have Jabril Peppers back there. Julian Love played it better when he did he played well when he actually got a chance at the end of last year, but still needed improvement. And Xavier McKinney is one of those do-it-all kind of players. He lined up a lot at slot corner, also at free safety. Every now and then would blitz and rush the passer. He was very good at that at Alabama. And he was, I think 26 on my big board. He was my second safety rank, and he goes 36 to Giants. So great value there. Matt Pert, the tackle out of UConn, definitely profiles as that ideal tackle at the next level when he's 6'6", 6'7" or so, with like 36-inch arms, just ridiculous. So he might not be able to play right away, but he doesn't need to. He can develop and spend a year or two as a backup. So they addressed the offensive line. Darnay Holmes, the guy that you really liked, you talked about as a potential sleeper. They add him to the cornerback mix. Again, another major need for them. Shane Lemieux, the guard out of Oregon, tremendous value there. I had him ranked in my top 100. He goes in the 5th round. Actually, he was right outside my top 100, but he was high on my guard rankings. So they get him, another offensive lineman. And then they filled out the roster with a bunch of linebackers mostly and one edge rusher like Cameron Brown out of Penn State, TJ Brunson from South Carolina, just to name a couple. So they did a good job. They filled a lot of needs. Now, the only thing they didn't really address was edge rusher. But at the same time, where they were picking, there weren't a lot of great options, basically. They could have done it instead of McKinney, but I did have McKinney higher rated than, say, Yetur Gross-Matos or A.J. Epinesa. So I think they did make the right pick there. That would be the only thing that I would say that would have been nice for them to do is if they could have gotten a edge rusher that either could have started right away or at least been a rotational piece, but they didn't really get that. But just O-line, secondary, those primarily, and got a lot of special teamers later on that can really contribute right away. So if I were to grade them too, I'd probably put it around the B+, similar to the Jets.
Dude, the Browns are one of my favorite the Giants were one of my favorite drafts. Aside from their late picks, which, like you said, they just took swings on linebackers.
It's mostly special teamers. I mean,
special teamers.
If you're taking like linebackers, tight ends, safeties, corners late, a lot of times that's the bulk of what makes up special teams.
Cam Brown, I really like. He fell right outside my top 200. I was struggling to place him, but I had him as a 7th round cut type of value. But getting him in the 6th round was nice. But really, the rest of the class is where it's at. Thomas was considered by many to be considered the top tackle in the league in the draft. Could argue talk to 4 different people, get 4 different answers for the top offensive tackle in the class. And Thomas was a great pick. I have no issue with that pick at all. McKinney, I had him as a 1st round grade, 18th overall, my only 1st round safety. Huge value, should be a plug and play right away, both those guys. Pert needs to add some strength. And yeah, he's 6'7" with long ass arms. He's got good weight, but he needs to add some girth and he's got to add some strength to really compete at the next level. But that was a solid pick. Shane Lemieux, I had an 87 on my big board to get him at 150. Crazy good value. A guy who should compete at the right guard spot for them as a backup to their starters currently. Nice, solid guy. And then Darnay Holmes, like Bob said, I really like Holmes. He's kind of small at 5'10". Doesn't really have the length you look for at the position, but he's a scrapper. And even though this past year wasn't that great, it did affect his grade. He was better in the past. So you hope he can play to that level, be a scrappy kind of slot guy for him. They definitely have a need at the position, so he should get playing time right away. And the only reason I didn't mention this as one of my top three is because we were going to talk about it now. I wanted to give you the floor, but I really like this
Well,
class.
one other thing to add about Darnay Holmes is he also can return punts and kicks, which they
Hmm.
really haven't had a great punt or kick returner. They've had solid guys over the past few years that did a good job of catching the ball, at least, which used to be a problem. But
Hmm.
Darnay Holmes, the tape was nice. Not only is he feisty as a corner, albeit undersized, but he can return punts and could definitely contribute on special teams for the Giants.
I do want to give honorable mention to a couple draft classes. The Cardinals were one that stood out. Isaiah Simmons in the first round, trading a second round for DeAndre Hopkins, and Josh Jones at tackle in the third. A plus, really solid. And I like the guys I took. Eno Benjamin in the seventh round could prove to be a steal should David Johnson, I mean, what's his name, Kenyon Drake get hurt or something like that. Benjamin was really solid at Arizona State, particularly as a receiver. So that stands out to me, and I want to give some love to the Colts. I think the Colts are due for some love. They traded their first round pick for DeForest Buckner, which should value into it. He's a great player. Michael Pittman Jr. was a solid pick in the second round. He adds an element they did not have before. Him and
T.Y. Hill.
T.Y.
It's a
Hilton.
great
Yes, sorry.
compliment.
Yeah,
Total opposite.
the name escaped me, but Pip likes throwing it up. So now he's got a Mike Williams type guy he could throw it up to, which is nice. Jonathan Taylor at running back. They're going to try to run the ball. They're probably not going to end up paying Mac, so this will be a replacement for Mac once Mac leaves. But I love Jonathan Taylor, 22nd overall on my board, early second round grade. Jacob Eason, quarterback, rocket arm, can learn behind Pip for a year, maybe take over next year, because Jacoby Brissett's contract I think is also up after this season, something like that, or he might have 1 year after that. But it's coming up done. Danny Pinter from Ball State at guard in the fifth round was one of my favorite guys coming out of the combine. Athletic, showed well at the combine, showed well in the circuit overall. I think he could be a solid backup for him, compete for a starting spot in time. And then Robert Windsor from Penn State was another solid cat. So a lot of good players for the Colts, and they're trying to make a push for the playoffs, and this will help.
Definitely will. The only other honorable mentions I have, Dan had some of them. So some of the ones, even the top three of my hates, for example, actually, I would have the Packers as my most hated. I think Dan does too, and a lot of other people do. But we didn't want to talk about all the same teams. But as far as love, basically, besides Broncos and Vikings, which Dan talked about, I also really love the Jaguars. Now, I didn't love C.J. Henderson necessarily at 9, although it's not far off from where I had him on my big board. He was around 16 or so.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was a slight reach, actually 19. So 10 picks higher than where I had him on that big board. But, I mean, they addressed a lot of needs. And Kayvon Chason is who they wind up getting basically as part of the Jalen Ramsey trade, the first-round pick they got back from the Rams. And he's definitely a speed edge rusher that should be a perfect complement to Josh Allen. Needs some seasoning and some development. He's only redshirt sophomore, but when you're a rebuilding team like them, you want to make home run picks. You want to swing
Mm-hmm.
for the fences. I think it's okay to go for doubles. Teams like the Ravens that get doubles all the time, it's great. But the Jaguars having so many picks, I love that pick at 20. It's also great value. And then Laviska Shenault, a receiver I really loved. I think he got undervalued as the season went on and the draft process rolled on. Didn't run a great 40. But to me, I didn't have a first round grade on him, but he was right outside it. He was 24 on my big board at 22 first-round grades. So I didn't like that he kept getting pushed down as everything wore on. So he goes in the second. I love that. And then Davon Hamilton, the defensive tackle at Ohio State. Ben Barch, he can contribute at tackle or even guard from the small school St. John's in Minnesota. Even Josiah Scott, cornerback out of Michigan State. I think he could contribute right away, and he winds up going in like the fifth round. So I think the Jags had a great draft. And then also the Bucks. Tristan Wirfs. Even if he doesn't play right tackle right away, he can play guard. I can see him playing guard and helping out Tom Brady and protecting him there. They also trade for Rob Gronkowski. How much he has left, I don't know, but I think it's worth a flyer when it's a fourth-round pick and he's best buds with Tom Brady. I like that. And then you also throw in the fact that they got Antoine Winfield Jr. in the second round. He's another player that could outperform his draft status. It's not that he went so far down in the second round, but I think he's better than pick 45 overall, and they need a ton of
Mm-hmm.
secondary help. I think he could start right away at safety or maybe even plays a lot of nickel corner. So I think those
Mm-hmm.
two Florida teams, along with Miami, all did a great job. All three Florida teams, rather, just did a great job in this draft.
I want to give some love to my boy Jake Luton at quarterback. The Jaguars took him at 189. I had him at 158 on my board. Sleeper, 6'6", 224 in the combine. And another one who was a favorite of coaches around the league leading up to the draft process. So I think that's a wrap.
I do
That puts a
believe
bow
so.
on the NFL draft, baby. That's it.
A lot to talk about, a lot of teams to cover. We tried to really, we only have X amount of time that people are going to pay attention, but we want to try to cover as many teams as possible and talk about your favorite team. And hopefully we did that. I think we kind of touched on almost every team in one way or the other, even if it was brief.
Yeah, so showing some love to everybody. Got a lot out of the way. That's it. Now we have another long wait till anything football related pops back up. We'll see what happens with training camps and organized team activities and stuff like that over this whole Corona business. But at least this was a nice brief getaway and something to talk about, something to look at. We can look at the rosters now that they're pretty much good to go for the preseason. We can talk about that and get ready for Madden.
I know, right? I dove right into it, and I probably watched more of this draft than any other previously, which is weird to say, but I think usually I love the first 3 rounds. I watch, every minute of that I can, but, rounds 4 through 7, sometimes I've been working in the past on that Saturday or, just, lose interest because even though you might rank some of the guys, plenty of them, you're like, let's be honest, I didn't watch much tape of all these players, of especially 5th, 6th, 7th rounders, but really dove in, and I'm going to go back to that recording I mentioned at the top and check out some of what I missed and maybe some of the pieces they talked about certain guys or the highlights. And it's really all I can do because we have no live sports. But alas, I think the NFL hopefully is on the right track and we'll start on time anyway. They have a lot of time before they need to be all together in the same building.
That they do. So fingers crossed that everybody does the right thing. This whole Corona thing finishes sooner rather than later. It's gone on long enough. I want my sports back. I want my life back. I'm ready.
Couldn't have said it better myself. I'm ready. I want it back, but
ready,
gotta stay safe.
Gotta stay safe, stay smart, fight the curve, right? So
flatten the curve, yeah.
Flatten the curve. That's the one.
You want to beat it down to flatten it? Yeah, why not?
Beat that bitch. I'm Dan Kornhauser.
I'm Bobby Hunt.
Thank you guys for tuning in. Give us a like, give us a follow, share with your fiend friends. And of course, we're on Instagram. We're on Twitter. What's the handle, Bob?
DB Talking Sports. That's D as in Dan, B as in Bob. Talking Sports. Hit us up on there. Send us a DM. Ask us questions. Give us comments. Whatever it may be. And we'd love to hear from you about any topic, whether it's football or draft related or not. We'll cover the other sports. We just don't have anything to really talk about as far as live sports. So we still love to hear any and all feedback.
Absolutely. Give us a follow. Like I said, we will appreciate that. We're also on YouTube. We're at DB Talking Sports, shortened. So we're on there as well. Give us a like, give us a subscription. We'll show you some love. We will respond to your comments and we'll go from there. Until next time, we'll catch you guys later.